Hi, I'm Gabriella, welcome to my channel. I've been thinking about fan castings a bit recently and I've kind of come to the conclusion that they're not that great, or rather they have the potential to not be great. I think they're sort of a natural thing. Everyone does that when they know a show's being produced, if they have an idea of what the characters are like. For example, if it's based off a book or a show's being made out of a movie or vice versa. I think it's only natural that people turn around and think, that well-known actress or actor would be great in that role, because I think that's just what we do naturally. And I think that's absolutely fine. And talking about it with your friends and other people who have the same sort of ideas, I think that's absolutely fine. I just think that there's a bit of a line that when it gets crossed makes fan castings not that great. And what I'm talking about is when people kind of go out of their way, usually on social media, to kind of try get this person cast or state their feelings very strongly online. And it can get to the point where people are messaging casting directors, actors, people they perceive to have things to do with the film that have nothing to do with the casting, just because they want to see this character in that role, or they think that they know more about that role than the casting directors and the people producing that film do. I'm sure not everyone thinks that, but that's how it comes across. So it's not just rude, but it can get actors' hopes up. They can think, well, I've got a lot of support behind this, maybe I do deserve this role, and then they might be extra upset if they don't get it. It can prejudice fans against the people who do actually get the role. How awkward would it be if you had been cast in a role but it hadn't yet been announced and people were loudly demanding other people for your role? It wouldn't make you feel that great. It would make you be a bit worried whether people would actually like the news that you are playing the role when it's announced. Like I said, I think it's perfectly fine for people to have these opinions, but if they get taken too far, it's not great. Nevertheless, I like fan casting just as much as the next person. So I've come up with a little twist that's actually quite useful for actors, and that is doing fan casts of the show using characters from other shows. It's still fun for fans, and it's also a useful exercise for actors because it can help you solidify casting types. It can help you work out which characters fit to which casting types and which characters you might want to apply for then. And also, it can help with choosing audition songs. Usually, when you audition for a character, you want a song that suits the character. An easy way to do this is to find another character that is similar to the character you're auditioning for and pick a song that they sing. So the transfer of Dear Evan Hansen to the West End has been announced, so I thought it might be a fun place to start with that one, seeing as it's being cast right now. Some of these I found quite easy to pick out, and other ones I went through so many different characters and could not pick one, and then eventually, for the point of the video, had to pick one. But to start with, Evan, I think an ideal character to play that role would be Seymour from Little Shop of Horrors. I think they're both quite downtrodden characters, especially to start with, and then they go on a very similar character arc of getting what they want, or what they think they want, and it turns out to not actually be all that great in the grand scheme of things. And I think they go through a lot of very similar moments in each of their shows and each of their journeys, so I think Seymour would be a great fit for Evan. Then for Zoe, I really struggled with this one, and I ended up going not quite out of the box, but I think people might be a bit surprised by this one, and that is Liesl from Sound of Music. I feel like they both seem quite different characters, but when you think about it more, they're both having family problems. Liesl has lost her mother, where Zoe has lost her brother, and despite that trauma, they've both stayed very strong, and they're not afraid to be themselves and kind of speak their mind. On top of that, they both go through a sort of similar romance arc of finding someone they wouldn't normally think of. I mean, Zoe and Evan had never really spoken before, and Liesl and Rolf, they weren't really meant to be because she was like a well-born girl and he was a paper boy. So they were kind of people that you wouldn't really match together, and they ended up being quite in love, but then the guy ends up betraying the girl and they're very upset, but they actually stay quite strong for it again. So in those two respects, I thought that they were quite similar. Then for Connor, I thought the perfect character to play this role is Eddie Birdlace from Dogfight. And that's quite coincidental because it's another Pascal Pool musical. And that can actually be another useful way of finding songs for your auditions, is finding songs from other shows that the same composers or similar composers have written. But I did actually choose Eddie not because of the songs necessarily, but because of the character. I know that Connor, for most of the musical, isn't actually himself. For the majority of the musical, he's actually presented as how the other characters see him. He's presented through the other characters. So we don't actually see Connor as himself for most of it. But despite that, I thought that him and Eddie were both very similar because they're both deeply troubled people and they hide it with a big sense of bravado. Like, they both put on a big show of bravado to hide the fact that they are so troubled. For Jared, I thought the perfect character to play him was another Eddie, but this one from Funny Girl. And I felt they were both just the very stereotypical sidekick friend who helps bring the main character up in the world and then gets thrown to the side by them and feels quite angry about it. And especially when Eddie sings Who Taught Her Everything She Knows later on in Act 2, which I think used to be earlier on in the original version. But I feel that's very similar to Jared turning around and joining in with Good For You towards the end of Act 2 in Dear Evan Hansen. I feel they're both quite similar moments for the characters. Next, Alana. I thought she was quite similar to Heather Duke from Heathers. I think the deciding thing for that, for me, was how Heather Duke in Heathers gets basically blackmailed into doing something by JD, and then it actually turns out to be a good thing for her to be doing for her social status, so she kind of takes credit for the whole thing. So she actually puts a lot of effort into it and tries to make it a big thing because it'll help her out. And she doesn't really care about ulterior motives that might have originally been behind it. She's very focused on just doing something that's going to up her social status. And I think that's very similar to how Alana takes control of the Connor project. Neither of them are really liked at all. They're not outcasts or anything, but neither of them are particularly liked. And so I thought they made quite a good match. For Cynthia, I thought that Miss Gardner from Carrie the Musical would be a good fit. And I think that's because they're both quite nurturing characters. They deal with a lot of hassle from kids and try to do their best, but I think the function of both of those characters is to be a nurturing role for the children, and I think in that respect they're very similar, so I thought that worked. Then for Larry, I kind of had a bit of a throw-up between Captain Von Trapp from Sound of Music and Mr. Warbucks from Annie. I think they're both quite similar, but in the end I went with Mr. Warbucks from Annie, because while Captain Von Trapp is also very disconnected from his family, in his case it's Maria, his new wife, that kind of brings him back to being a family man, whereas with Mr. Warbucks, it is Annie, the child, who brings him back to being a family man, and I think that's the same with Larry. He is a family man, but at the beginning at least he feels very disconnected, and it's only after Connor dies and Evan comes into his life that he starts to really reconnect with his family. And finally, Heidi. I went with Mrs. Johnston from Blood Brothers, and I think they're both just very similar characters. They work really hard, they're single parents working for their kids, doing everything they think is best for their kids, and it's not always the right choice or the best choice, but they're doing it with their kids in mind as their central focus. And that seems to be the one like true love and joy in life, is their children, and they do everything they possibly can for them. And so I thought that those two characters were very similar, and Mrs. Johnson would be a great character to play Heidi. So there you have my new twist on fan casting. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any other ideas for characters that you think could have played these roles. I'd love to hear what you think on this and who you think could play these roles, especially from the actor's point of view and wanting to use this as an exercise. So let me know in the comments. And if you want to see me do this with other shows, then please give this video a like, because I'll make more videos like this. And make sure to subscribe so you know when those videos come out. See you next time. Bye!